You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 9th of August 2024 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead, as Lebanon braces for an attack, we'll ask what plans are being made in the event of an Israeli invasion. Catalan leader Carles Puigdemont is on the run after returning to Spain for the first time in 7 years. We'll hear more about the situation. We'll look at the diplomatic row over the marking of the 1945 nuclear strike on Nagasaki and...
Walz embraces policies allowing convicted felons to vote.
Yes, imagine convicted felons being allowed to vote. They'll be wanting to run for president next.
Andrew Muller shares what he's learnt this week. We'll have a look through the world's front pages, get a hit of retail news, and we'll hear from our colleagues in Paris about the last in our special Olympic coverage. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. Israeli forces stepped up airstrikes across the Gaza Strip on Thursday, killing at least 40 people, Palestinian medics said, in further battle with Hamas-led militants as Israel braced for a potential wider war in the region. US Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump and Democratic opponent Kamala Harris will debate on September the 10th on ABC, setting up the first face-to-face match-up between the rivals in what polls show is a close race. And former Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina will return to her country when its new caretaker government decides to hold elections. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. Now, we begin the show in Lebanon, where the country is on high alert following the death of Hamas political chief Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran last week, which Iran has blamed on Israel. This came hours after Israel killed Hezbollah senior commander Fouad Shukr in Beirut. Iran has vowed severe retaliation against Israel, which could spark a serious Israeli response against Hezbollah, the Iran-backed militia and political movement based in Lebanon. The US, the UK, Australia, France, Canada, South Korea, Saudi Arabia, Japan, Turkey and Jordan are among the countries to have urged their citizens to leave Lebanon as soon as possible. Well, I'm joined now by Renar Mansour, who is a research fellow in the Middle East and North Africa programme and project director of the Iraq Initiative at Chatham House. Renar, lovely to have you back on the show. I wonder if you could tell us, what is the atmosphere in Lebanon right now?
Well, for a long time, but especially since October 7th, Lebanese, those living in Lebanon, have been concerned of this outcome. It's always kind of been on the brink. And people have been thinking, what if Israel invades? What if, we have to flee? But so sort of day by day went on and things resumed as normal. I think that has changed now. I think, the embassies, as you said, some of the foreign sort of countries that are in Lebanon have started serious evacuation plans. People have started to evacuate. I think people really do believe right now that something will happen, and they're just waiting to see what that would be. In Beirut, people, have heard these Israeli jets make sounds, these sonic booms. There's a sort of fear. People are stockpiling essential goods. Those who have homes, for example, in the mountains have gone up to the mountains of Lebanon, essentially waiting for what they believe now is inevitable.
You're talking about stockpiling, and I wonder if there is enough food and fuel, and if in the event of an attack, even if there is, could those provisions be distributed? We know that there was a problem during the conflict in 2006. All of that stuff existed, but it couldn't get out to the people.
Yes, and keep in mind that, Lebanon has gone through tremendous challenges in the last few years. There was almost 4 years ago, this month, a few days ago, this port explosion that damaged so much infrastructure, that killed Lebanese, and that the country hasn't been able to recover from. there has been a financial crash where its banking sector turned out to be what the World Bank called a Ponzi scheme. And so people just lost their own savings overnight. So medicine, for bread, foods, essential goods have already been a struggle to come to Lebanon. And so even so, if we think of 2006 and how difficult that was, this is even more difficult given all of these other external sort of events that have happened in this sort of lead up to today.
And I just wonder about things like effect on mental health of the population.
It's very difficult. This is a population that, there are almost two sides to Lebanon. It's a population that is known, and people go to Beirut, they go to restaurants, they go to parties, there are beaches that are still full. There's this kind of sort of vibrant life in Lebanon on the Mediterranean, like you would have many Mediterranean countries. And at the same time, this is a population that has grown up hearing about or living through a 15-year civil war. After that, the sort of rise of Hezbollah and its fight against Israel, an occupation of Israel that they've sort of fought against until 2000, then an occupation of Syria that they fought against, then the spillover of the Syrian war into Lebanon, then their own financial crash and corruption-related issues. So it's a population that has just been hit, every few years hit. And has tried to kind of live on, has tried to sort of deal with this struggle, but it is psychologically a very traumatic event, and people are scared. People are concerned about what could happen. And, the few times I've been to Lebanon since October 7th, it's been very clear that people just want this, the biggest fear was exactly what is probably, they believe will happen now, which is Israel will invade and there will be a war that will affect their lives even further.
And I mean, as you say, that there isn't really a functional government. And I wonder if the people in the country trust the authorities to take care of them.
Exactly. There has been even a huge protest movement a few years ago in Lebanon that citizen trust of government is, at very low. People believe that the elites across the spectrum are corrupt and only look after their own interests. Lebanon is a country that doesn't have, for example, electricity 24 hours a day, doesn't have essential services. Where the gap between the extreme wealthy and the extreme poor has only increased in the last few years. So there is no trust. And so people are desperate and they're looking for communities and sort of local solutions to try and, weather out this storm. But that this is part of the concern that, in this fight, Hezbollah, for example, is one of the biggest sort of political movements, armed groups in Lebanon, but it's also embedded in the state. And so Hezbollah is going to fight this, and 2006 made Hezbollah stronger. And so one concern a lot of Lebanese have is that this fight will kind of turn these leaders that they have been protesting against into those sort of war heroes in a way. And so it's distracting from the bigger issues that they've been trying to fight against when it comes to these issues of how to regain trust, how to have good governance, better governance, and how to sort of build a coherent state.
Absolutely. I wonder if you could tell us about the plans that those countries I mentioned at the top, so that includes the US, the UK, Australia, France and Canada. What plans have they made to evacuate their nationals?
So up until now, there have been a lot of flights. The airport is still active, and there have been flights. It's been full every day, people leaving, those who can, of course. There are also options to take boats to Cyprus, and this has been used in the past, and sometimes to take, in the past, one option would have been to go to Syria, which is very close to Lebanon, but of course that option no longer exists. So I would say until now, that's what the plan has been. And again, I think this is important because it signifies an escalation. Lebanon has long been for these countries a don't visit unless essential, don't visit. It's been red on the FCDO and other lists. However, these active plans to sort of vacate, to move out their nationals is something that's different to previous scares.
Let's just talk about military backup for a moment. We know, for instance, that Britain has sent troops to the region. There are many more on standby. Can you just expand on what sort of armed force is waiting?
Yes, so and Britain and the US, of course, their number one, a big priority for the Americans and the UK has been not to let this happen. Because Israel is at the end of the day the ally in the region for both the US and the UK. And so although they've struggled on the Palestine front in terms of, getting a ceasefire, and instead supported Israel through its bombings. They've sort of said, at least we've stopped the regional war from happening. Of course, Britain has, been part of a war against the Houthis in Yemen, which is connected to this wider axis of resistance that includes Hezbollah, Hamas, and some PMF groups, Popular Mobilization Forces groups in Iraq. So Britain has a side, and the US has a side, and so if there is a war with Israel in the region, they will be on the side of their ally, which is Israel.
And of course, part of this is just the waiting, the kind of psychological tenseness of not knowing if and when it might happen. What's your best guess?
It's tough to say because, what has been clear, especially since this escalation had increased. Or expanded in the region was that Hezbollah and its other allies linked to Iran were really trying to not have this scenario. This was not the time for them. They had other issues, domestic issues, other problems to deal with. But now I think, it's almost they've been pushed into this, right? I mean, Iran having a Hamas leader killed on its territory is embarrassing for Iran. This senior Hezbollah commander killed on this, within hours in Beirut, and they have to act now. This is not a conventional war in which two armies will fight. This is not the way that Hezbollah fights. Hezbollah is, this is asymmetrical warfare, which means that it needs time and it needs to kind of be a bit more strategic because it doesn't, on paper will not win against Israel, but that, this is not a conventional war. And so the reason why Hezbollah claims it won in 2006 and many people believe Hezbollah won is because it's able to do asymmetrical warfare against Israel because, war is beyond just how many tanks you have. And it's, it's the politics, it's the narratives, it's the ideological warfare, and all of this what Hezbollah is gearing up to. So it's hard to answer your question, but most people think it is imminent.
Reynard, thank you very much indeed. That's Reynard Mansour there, and this is The Globalist. It's 8:12 in Barcelona, 7:12 here in London. Carles Puigdemont, the Catalan separatist, returned to Spain for the first time in 7 years yesterday. The 61-year-old, a former president of the Catalonia region, has been living in self-imposed exile in Belgium after organising an illegal independence referendum in Catalonia. He declared his intention to be at the Catalan Parliament in Barcelona on Thursday as it swore in the region's new leader. He duly arrived, gave a short speech near the Parliament to thousands of supporters, then promptly disappeared. Well, I'm joined by Aitor Hernandez Morales, who's a senior reporter for Politico, covering Iberian affairs. Aitor, many thanks for coming on the show. Has he been found?
No, he remains at large. It really is a remarkable series of events. This is a man who is completely iconic in Spain. Everyone knows him since he attempted to declare Catalonia's independence back in 2017, and he has a very particular look. He has this kind of Beatles-ish mop top. But yeah, he was able to step away, and the Mossos d'Esquadra, the Catalan regional police, is now looking at him perhaps with even greater enthusiasm because it's now become obviously a source of tremendous humiliation for this police force.
But why did he come back?
Well, it was a bit of Puigdemont's last gasp. There were regional elections in Catalonia in May, and Puigdemont was hoping to take advantage of those to be re-elected to the post from which he was stripped back in 2017, and also have this coincide with Spain passing an amnesty for those who were involved in the independence movement. But both options turned out poorly for him. He lost the elections, and socialist Salvador Illa was elected by citizens who were looking for a bit more of a moderate, conciliatory leader after so many years of separatist struggle. And then even though Spain passed this amnesty law, unfortunately, the country's judiciary is refusing to adopt it, to execute it. And so in Puigdemont's case in particular, judges argue that the law cannot be applied because he's accused of both terrorism and of money laundering with the funds that were used to execute the independence referendum a few years ago. I should note that both cases are considered to be pretty scurrilous and without any sort of foundation. But as long as the cases remain active, so too do the options which the judges are using to not enact the amnesty in his case. So the arrest warrant for Puigdemont remains completely valid.
So let's look at what happened. So first of all, how did his address to his supporters unfold?
Well, it was pretty remarkable because as someone who's been following Puigdemont for years, I can certainly tell you that he is a very long-winded politician. When he was running for the regional presidency, it really was a punishing campaign, especially for his supporters who were being bussed over the border to France to watch him give these speeches. And these speeches could easily give, Trump a run for his money. They would last well over 2 hours. But his speech yesterday lasted less than 2 minutes and basically consisted in him saying, "I'm here, good morning," and then just very rapidly telling supporters that it was important for him to appear to remind people that he still exists and therefore the separatist movement still exists. But then immediately afterward, he said, "I'm heading to the parliament." He came off the stage and then disappeared.
So how did he get away?
Well, we spoke with an MI6 former MI6 agent actually to ask how he thought that this could have been pulled off. And basically what Puigdemont did was blend into the crowd. We now are getting more and more details, and it seems like a classic diversion tactic. As he was leaving the stage, he made sure people saw that he was putting on this kind of beach-style straw hat. And then he was momentarily out of sight, and it looks like during that moment he switched hats, put on a baseball cap, and then folded himself into a group of supporters and fellow separatist politicians that were wearing very similar clothing. So the moment he covered up that mop top and then was just one among a sea of other people wearing blazers, he was able to kind of shift away from the police, make it onto a side street, get in a car, and be whisked away from the scene.
So it does seem like he did have possible police assistance because somebody's been arrested.
Indeed, 2 people have been arrested now. So far, the people in custody are one of these Catalan regional police members who owns the car that is believed to have been used in the escape, and then a second one has been arrested for actually providing personal support to Puigdemont, and it's understood that this person helped him leave the crowd and get into that car.
So what will happen now?
Well, it's a bit of a mystery. Puigdemont's goal in coming down to Catalonia was to stop Salvador Illa, the winner of the elections, from becoming president. He ultimately failed. Yesterday, the vote was held within the parliament, and Illa has been made the president of Catalonia, which means that for the first time in 14 years, Catalonia is not ruled by a separatist politician. In Puigdemont's case, the operating theory is that he has not left the country, he has not left the region, and he may not even have left the city. The suspicion is that he may be hiding in a very nearby building. And at this point, even though he does have apparently many sympathetic members and supporters within the Catalan regional police, at this point, the humiliation to the force is such that it really does look like they will be looking for him and they will be out to find him. Everyone's very upset.
And to what end? I mean, he can't stay hidden forever.
He won't. So if he's taken into custody, what would happen is he is currently being sought by Spain's Supreme Court. So rather humiliatingly for him, he would be put in a police van, taken to Madrid, and he would be subject to an initial hearing there. Now, the irony here is that all of his separatist colleagues have been released very quickly after that initial hearing. But of course, in Puigdemont's case, there's a very evident risk of flight. So it is very likely that he will be put in jail for this stunt, if not for, 7 years that he's spent evading police, and he will have to wait around there until his case is heard.
And of course, one has no idea then what that will prompt his supporters to do.
Well, it's going to be very interesting because, as you know, Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez is leading a minority government that came into power with the supporters of Puigdemont's Junts party. So one definite consequence of all of this is that it's likely that Puigdemont's party will no longer collaborate with Sanchez, which means it's going to be very difficult for him to pass any legislation in the national parliament. In terms of mobilization, I have to tell you, the last time Puigdemont held a speech in Barcelona back in 2017, we were talking about crowds of over 1 million people. Yesterday, only 3,500 people came out. So his star may have fallen quite a bit.
Aitor, thank you very much indeed. That's Aitor Hernandez Morales. Now, still to come on the programme.
Some artistic greats are on hand today to round off Monocle in Paris's 2-week residency, from the illustrator who drew some of Disney's greatest characters to the woman in charge of the artistic legacy of the Olympics. I'm Emma Nelson, and I'll be here a little later with a preview of today's show.
That's Emma and the Monocle team in Paris on their final stretch of Olympic coverage. This is The Globalist.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
It's 7:21 here in London. I'm Georgina Godwin, broadcasting to you live from Midori House. We'll continue now with today's newspapers, and joining me in the studio is Simon Brooke, who's a journalist and a communications consultant. Simon, I'm very grateful to you for pointing out this New York Times article, because frankly, if one needed any persuasion that Donald Trump is deranged, one no longer needs it. This piece is just, it's factual reporting. It just tells us what he said. What he said is insane.
It is bizarre, isn't it? I mean, yes, the New York Times reports Trump tries to wrestle back attention at this Mar-a-Lago news conference, an hour-long exchange with reporters. The former president has criticised Kamala Harris for not having any sort of press conferences like this so far. He also insulted her intelligence and boasted about the size of his own rallies. So, interesting, as the New York Times put it, Trump trying to shoehorn himself back into the news agenda. Fascinating, obsessed, of course, with the size of crowds. And, of course, this takes us back to his first instance in the White House. He's quoted in the paper saying, you look at Martin Luther King when he did his speech, his great speech, and you look at ours, the same real estate, I love it from the real estate owner, same everything, same number of people, if not, we had more. So it is bizarre, and as you say, the paper makes the point that his wide-ranging remarks were sometimes meandering as he insulted the vice president's intelligence. And also, I think this is really quite remarkable that he refused to concede his election loss in November 2020 and the violent attack on the Capitol on January the 6th, 2021 by a mob of his supporters, described it as a peaceful transfer of power, which seems a remarkable revision of history, doesn't it? And I think what's interesting, that just looking at this, there's a sort of comparison here I was thinking of anyway, with his convention speech when he meandered and we saw those shots of his normally avid supporters looking slightly bored and disenchanted, really.
And in fact, we've seen those rallies sort of slightly empty, haven't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, the big comparison here, I suppose, is his kind of hate-filled rhetoric. And then you have this kind of joyful optimism from the other side.
Yeah, normally campaigns that promote optimism and goodwill normally win. So absolutely. It's really striking in this election, isn't it? This is something that obviously Biden wasn't able to generate, but Kamala Harris has. That incredible sort of buzz of energy, enthusiasm, adrenaline through the Democrats as they've finally got a candidate who just seems to be at least the right age. Anyway, I think there's still quite a lot of risk in the Harris campaign. I mean, he's right that she hasn't done the kind of press conference and major interviews that he's done, even though he only does it with friendly outlets. And I'm guessing that the Harris campaign is doing a lot of training for her now, getting ready for these kind of things. And also, of course, we're seeing this intense scrutiny now starting of Tim Walz, her running mate. I'm just looking for a bit of dirt perhaps on him, which so far they've been unable to find.
He just seems like such a nice guy. Yeah.
Oh, and a brilliant choice, I think, as well. And of course, it looks better if you compare him to Trump's own running mate, J.D. Vance, who has certainly stumbled.
Yeah. So just one question really struck me, because, of course, one of the key elements of this election campaign is abortion. And Trump was asked if he would direct the Food and Drug Administration to revoke access to abortion pills. The New York Times says he seemed not to understand the question and provided an incoherent answer that didn't address it. So he just kind of goes off on one. It's very, very odd.
It is. I think, as I say, I just get the feeling that his campaign's slightly stumbling, and having had all that focus in the last few months, years even, on Biden's age and on his ability to deliver a press conference and be coherent. It's interesting, isn't it, now that the focus seems to be more on Trump's performance.
Yeah. Let's go to Mali now, or Mali and Russia and Ukraine. This is an extraordinary story.
Yeah, absolutely. So Al Jazeera is looking at Mali's spat with Kyiv and asking whether the Russia-Ukraine war is spilling over into Africa. And Al Jazeera reminds us that this week Mali announced that it was severing ties with Ukraine after accusing Kyiv of having had a hand in an ambush in Mali's northern Kidal region at the end of last month, which saw dozens of Malian soldiers and Russian Wagner mercenaries killed. And afterwards, a spokesman for Ukraine's military spy agency revealed cryptically, as Al Jazeera puts it, that the rebels who did the attack had the necessary information to carry it out. Kyiv then rushed to backtrack this initial boast, but also said that the Malian government should have carried out more of an investigation before announcing that it was cutting its ties with Ukraine. But this is part of a trend here. Niger, Al Jazeera reminds us, has cut off relations with Kyiv earlier this week in a show of support. Senegal has summoned the Ukrainian ambassador to its foreign ministry. So there's long been concerns about Russia's influence in Africa, haven't there? And it just looks like this is a new example of that. Also, I think one of the things you have to put this into context, of course, that just in the last few days, Ukraine has sent troops into Western Russia. So it does seem to be more aggressive, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, yesterday we were discussing the rise of the great big tech giants, how they're turning right, how they're supporting Trump, how ultimately they're in charge of all of our data, how very worrying this is. A new story's just come out. It's in the FT today, talking about Google and Meta, who struck secret ad deals to target teenagers. Now, that is strictly against the law.
Well, absolutely. And this is, and also against Google's own guidelines, really. Yeah. So according to documents seen by the Financial Times, Google and Meta, which owns Instagram, have made a secret deal to target advertisements promoting Instagram to 13 to 17-year-olds, on YouTube. And this directly contradicts Google's own rules about targeting under 18s. And according to these documents seen by the FT, they even suggest that steps were taken to ensure that the true intent of the campaign was disguised, which is really shocking. And then there's another little point in this piece, which I found particularly distasteful, really, which was this campaign was already in development when Mark Zuckerberg made that dramatic appearance before the US Congress in January, when he apologised to the families of children who'd been victims of sexual exploitation and abuse on his platform. So he knew this was happening. And I think this is a really interesting example of how the big tech giants will say one thing to politicians, to the public, mea culpa, we're sorry, we're changing, whatever. And yet actually, secretly, privately, they're just carrying on the way they have done, without any kind of consequence, it seems. And I think, obviously, as you say, if you put this into the context of Elon Musk's comments about Venezuela and then also about the riots we've seen here in the UK, I wonder whether something under perhaps a Harris government administration might do something about this. Or is it too big a problem?
Or will Harris never get the opportunity because big tech will make sure that that's
Trump
the case?
is their man, isn't it, the White House?
Listen, so every day during the summer, I take my dog for a swim on Hampstead Heath. There are several ponds to choose from, and it's lovely, and she has a nice time, and it's great. But she does come out a bit smelly.
But isn't that the point of dogs? I'm not sure, really, I have to say. I mean, this is obviously an allusion to Dolce & Gabbana, which has launched this new perfume, which is for dogs. Fefe, I hope I'm pronouncing it right. It costs £84 a bottle. But on the other hand, it is an olfactory masterpiece, according to the brand, which blends fresh and delicate notes of ylang-ylang, musk and sandalwood. And the result is a tender and embracing fragrance crafted for a playful beauty regime, which I'm sure your dog always indulges in after her swimming.
I mean, my dog, just when she is washed, she just smells of head and shoulders. Really.
Well, our dog gets a bit stinky every now and then, and it's not the only one in our house. But, dogs smell of dogs, don't you? I mean, that's the whole point, really. That's why we love them, surely.
Yeah. I mean, I do see the point of this. Of course, why wouldn't you kind of capitalise on this kind of thing? But I wonder about the sort of animal cruelty aspect of it, in that dogs really don't want to smell of perfume.
They don't, and of course their sense of smell is 1,000 times greater than ours or whatever. So we might spritz ourselves with something in a department store, and think, "Oof, wish I hadn't done that." But when somebody else does it to you, and you're so sensitive, it must be really unpleasant. I have to say, I think this is obviously all about marketing or whatever. But I'm not going to be rushing out and buying a bottle.
No. Simon Brooke, thank you very much indeed. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. Israeli forces stepped up airstrikes across the Gaza Strip on Thursday, killing at least 40 people, Palestinian medics said, in further battle with Hamas-led militants as Israel braced for a potential wider war in the area. A relatively contained conflict between Israel and Hezbollah along its northern border, a spillover from the Gaza fighting, now threatens to spiral into an all-out regional war. US Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump and Democratic opponent Kamala Harris will debate on September the 10th on ABC, setting up the first face-to-face matchup between the rivals in what polls show is a close race. An Ipsos poll published on Thursday found Harris had widened her lead over Trump since late July. She leads him 42% to 37%. And former Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina will return to her country when its new caretaker government decides to hold elections, her son has said. Hasina fled to neighbouring India on Monday after weeks of deadly protests forced her to quit. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Today marks an important and tragic event in Japan. It's the anniversary of the day in 1945 that the United States dropped an atomic bomb on Nagasaki, killing 74,000 people, including many who survived the explosion but died later from radiation exposure. But it will not be observed, as it usually is, by representatives from the group of G7 nations after the decision to exclude Israel. Well, I'm joined now by Tomohiko Taniguchi, who is a former special advisor to the cabinet of Shinzo Abe. Tomohiko, many thanks for coming back on the programme. This attack came 3 days after the US dropped the world's first nuclear bomb on Hiroshima. That killed 140,000 people. It devastated the city. When that occasion was marked this Tuesday, the Israeli ambassador was invited. So why isn't that the case today? Is it a local decision? And what's the reason?
It is strictly the local decision, and that's been so for the last 76 years. Each municipal government of Hiroshima and Nagasaki held, respectively, their memorial ceremonies on the 6th and 9th. And this year, there has been a discrepancy of opinions held by the mayor of Hiroshima and the mayor of Nagasaki. And despite the fact that the mayor of Nagasaki has been receiving many calls from the representatives of those G7 nations, and as well as from the central government and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, it seems that Mr. Suzuki, which is the name of the mayor of Nagasaki, has chosen not to change his stance.
So what do you think his motivations are? Tell us a little bit about him.
I think he's catering to the gallery audience that may be behind him. And sometimes you must play a game with a script that if you show you're gutsy, opposed to big powers, you might perhaps be able to lift your perception. I think that's the sort of calculation that has motivated Nagasaki mayor, but frankly speaking, I have no idea. This mayor is not so much parochial, if you like. He's been exposed to international community. He has earned 3 master's degrees from London School of Economics, George Washington University, and Tufts University's Fletcher School. Nonetheless, he has chosen to exclude Israel, despite the fact he has continued to extend invitations to Iran, Palestinian Authority.
And who else is excluded?
Russia and Belarus. And that's the reason why G7 ambassadors and EU representatives have been very much opposed to Mayor's decision, because to put Israel in the same category with Russia and Belarus is utterly senseless. That's what those ambassadors said.
So the G7's staying away. I wonder if this puts the Prime Minister, Fumio Kishida, in a difficult position and where it leaves Japan's G7 standing.
I think so. The Japanese government, both the Prime Minister's office and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, have tried very much hard to distance themselves from the decision taken by the local government of Nagasaki. But certainly the attempt shown by the central government, the Prime Minister's office and Ministry of Foreign Affairs has ended in failure. That is to say, their persuasion has not worked out.
Extraordinary. How is it normally marked? I mean, they're worried about protests, apparently, Suzuki says. Is it normally a huge affair?
There have been protests, but in a different sort of protests. Anti-government protests have been a yearly phenomenon, both in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So Prime Minister, anyone who goes to Hiroshima and Nagasaki comes back heavily heckled by the local protesters. But in this case, Mr. Suzuki of Nagasaki, Mayor of Nagasaki, says that he has been worried about anti-Israel protests that may come up to disrupt the otherwise tranquil ceremony. But in Hiroshima, nothing of that sort has happened.
Tomohiko, many thanks. That's Tomohiko Taniguchi there, who's former special advisor to the cabinet of Shinzo Abe. You're with Monocle Radio. Well, it's Friday, which means our contributing editor, Andrew Muller, has been busy recapping the past 7 days for us. Here he is with this week's What We Learned.
We learned this week that Robert F. Kennedy Jr., third-party candidate in the 2024 US presidential election, son of this guy...
I run for the presidency because I want the Democratic Party and the United States of America to stand for hope.
And therefore, sentient concept of diminishing returns is,
So I pulled over and I picked up the bear and put him in the back of my van because I was going to skin the bear. And it was very good condition, and I was going to put the meat in my refrigerator. And you can do that in New York State. You can get a bear tag.
Long and frankly extremely weird even by RFK Jr. standard story short, we learned at last of a solution to a riddle that has bewildered New York City for 10 years, as was first reported thus.
Florence Slatkin says she was walking her dog this morning when she saw something furry underneath the bushes. Police say the 3-foot-long black bear cub had stab and slash wounds and appears to have been dumped there. Adding to the mystery, Slatkin says the baby bear was lying on top of this bicycle, which police confiscated as evidence.
And yes, it does seem very odd to allow an entire decade to elapse between the discovery of a dead bear in peculiar circumstances and an explanation of the mystery, like why... the big pause. We learned that it was indeed RFK Jr. who had dumped the bear after thinking better of his initial and just completely normal idea of driving it home to skin it, and had thrown in the bicycle as well, though it is maddeningly unclear as of this broadcast whether Kennedy hoped to create the impression that the bear had been hit by the bicycle or had been riding it. Either way, how very unlike a Kennedy to flee the scene of an accident, conjure a bizarre exculpatory alibi, and then spend years refusing to explain what actually happened. Anyway, this choice of music is going to sound really clever in about 20 seconds. Hang in there.
I can't wait to see where this goes.
Okay. Tell me more.
Let's see where this goes.
Wait for it. So, if we learned that RFK Jr.'s support may have dwindled to that cohort of Americans who can't see why you wouldn't keep a roadkill bear in your car for a day with a view to skinning and eating it, and then dump it in a city park with a bicycle when you decide you can't be bothered, so probably only about 60 million people, am I right? We learned that the Democratic Party hopes that America's bear dumpers are outnumbered by people who might warm to this guy.
I was born in West Point, Nebraska. I lived in Butte, a small town of 400, where community was a way of life. Growing up, I spent the summers working on the family farm. My mom and dad taught us, show generosity towards your neighbors and work for a common good.
All right, Tom Sawyer, pace yourself. We learned that the Democrats had unveiled their vice presidential pick, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. So write this... is by the Replacements, who were from Minnesota, and it's from their 1985 album, which was actually called Tim. And while we'll concede that it isn't in 3/4 time, which would really have sealed the deal, you know, waltz, waltz, etc., but you can't have everything, the track is called Left of the Dial, which we learned is where opponents of the Harris-Waltz ticket believe the governor's politics are located. Yes. Barely had Waltz been introduced that we learned that, far from the mild-mannered former teacher and high school football coach he was pitched as, the governor is, in fact, a deep-cover sleeper agent for Al-Shabaab. I know, right. We learned this from former Donald Trump advisor and third henchman on the right in any given James Bond film, Stephen Miller.
That means, under the Harris-Walz plan, they're going to turn the entire Midwest into Mogadishu.
And we learned all the evidence we needed to hear in support of this in no way insane assertion from noted conservative thinker and future star of cucumber spiralizer infomercials, Jesse Waters.
This guy changed the flag of this state to look more like Somalia. What is wrong with this guy?
We learned when we looked into it that this is not actually the case, shocked as you are, and so forth. We learned that while Minnesota had indeed adopted a new flag on Waltz's watch, it was chosen not by the governor, but by the State Emblems Redesign Commission from designs submitted by the Minnesotan public, and that the new Minnesota flag looks really nothing very much like the Somali one, being an 8-pointed star on a dark blue background overlapping a pale blue field, as opposed to a 5-pointed star on a plain blue background. Do we have to explain everything? But we learned that, worst of all, with Waltz in charge, things had changed.
And these are just facts, Mary Catherine Ham. I mean, if you know Minnesota, and I don't well, especially Milwaukee, it's changed.
From which we learned that Fox News' Laura Ingraham doesn't know Minnesota quite well enough to know that Milwaukee isn't in it. But we learned that the Republican Party had lit upon another promising attack line, Donald Trump's own press secretary Caroline Leavitt sallying forth as follows, as will now be read by Monocle's promising attack line's desk chief, Fernando Augusto Pacheco.
Walz embraces policies allowing convicted felons to vote.
Yes, imagine convicted felons being allowed to vote. They'll be wanting to run for president next. Returning to the theme of places with flags that look vaguely similar, we learned of a resumption of trans-Tasman hostilities in the form of this unseemly and frankly outrageous outburst from New Zealand's Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon.
The correspondence was being directed to an Australian minister overseas. And what I'd say to you in my dealings with Australians, it always pays to be incredibly simple and clear and use English.
We learned that Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese had stopped short of ordering a general mobilisation, at least for the moment.
Christopher Luxon's a friend of mine, but I often think that whilst we both speak English, sometimes we need interpreters with the Kiwi accent.
And as the region teeters on the brink, we'll close with analysis from Monocle's Trans-Tasman Affairs Desk Chief, David Stevens.
Yeah, I'm not really all that interested, sorry.
Food for thought. Thanks, David. For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Muller.
That was Monocle's contributing editor, Andrew Muller. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio. That just cut off before the line Vegemite sandwich. So when we're talking fashion now with Rebecca Tay, who's a retail expert and a brand consultant, but you live most of the time in Australia, where Vegemite sandwiches indeed are very popular.
They sure are, I know. I'm still partial to Marmite, I will say, but yes.
Rebecca, I was just telling the crew here how we met, and I think that the listeners might quite want to know that. And that I was being driven around Australia and had a really creepy cab driver.
I know.
Who dropped me at your now husband's wonderful camp, Paperbark Camp.
Yes.
And he was just so awful. And when he went to get my bags, I said, help this guy. And your husband completely took over. It was all fine, got rid of the driver. I had a lovely stay at the camp. Driver never came back. Ben drove me himself for 4 hours to the next place. And on that journey, he said to me, you should meet my girlfriend.
Yes. I know. That was so funny because I was living in London at the time still. Yeah. Exactly.
Here you are, and you are here to tell us about Miu Miu.
Yes, Miu Miu is such a funny kind of anomaly in the world of fashion at the moment. So it's the only brand that seems to be sort of hot, other than the Weve, but it is driving Prada Group kind of increases. So LVMH, Richemont, they've all reported annual earnings in the first half kind of down 1%. Kering, which owns Gucci, is down 11%, but Prada Group is up 18%. So, and that's largely driven by Miu Miu. It seems to sort of just be shielded from all of the bad.
Why is it doing so well?
There's a few kind of different theories. I think the designs have been very good. There has been a few kind of key hot pieces. There was this sort of mini skirt, sort of very tiny mini skirt a few seasons ago that made the cover of a magazine and sort of went viral. It's sort of resonating very well with Gen Z, I would say, as well, or Gen Z. And it's sort of, I think there's a lot of kind of pricing concerns across the industry. So a lot of people have said that designers like Dior and Louis Vuitton, they've all increased their sort of entry-level price point. Prada has done the same, but Miu Miu has always been that sort of second-tier brand, and there are still pieces that I think if you're dipping your toe into luxury, they definitely have those pieces, and they're desirable. They're not just kind of logoed items.
Yeah, so Miu Miu on the up, but Nike taking a dive.
Yes, Nike has definitely had some problems. It's lost about 30% of its market value in the last year, and I think in the next quarter they were saying that their revenues are going to be going down about another 10%. So really, really struggling. I think there's a lot of conversation about it right now because it's been so visible at the Olympics, and it is still very visible. I was reading something that said that every time you see an American on the podium, they are still wearing Nike, but there's been so many other brands coming into the mix. I think if you go onto the street and you look around at the sneakers on the tube, there's Hoka, there's On, New Balance is huge. Like New Balance has, increased. I think it's gone up about 23%, and they're expecting another 13% this year alone. So kind of complete opposite to Nike there, and they've just sort of lost their way, I think.
And I mean, it's funny how brands are influenced by who wears them. So, for instance, Rishi Sunak did a huge disservice, didn't he?
I know, to Adidas, yes, 100%.
Nobody wants to touch them anymore.
Yes, exactly. And meanwhile, New Balance is sort of being worn by lots of celebrities, but it's kind of just sort of everyday, I think the dad sneaker, that everyday dudes or girls could wear these chunky sneakers and just be kind of wearing the trend at the moment.
Yeah. Are we still wearing Sam Smiths?
You know what? I think I would say Adidas has sort of had its day a little bit. The Rishi Sunak thing definitely did not help at all. That was the Gazelle. But Stan Smiths, I think, are still a classic. But I think there's other sneakers out there at the moment. Yeah.
Now, you want to talk about the London-based designer David Comer. Now, I don't know him. Tell us more.
Yeah, this news sort of went under the radar. So he's a London-based Georgian designer. He's had his own label for many, many years, and he's kind of known for these cut-out, very sexy statement silhouettes, lots of dresses. He shows at London Fashion Week. But this kind of fell under the radar where he was appointed the new creative director at Blumarine, which is an Italian brand. They've had a bit of a resurgence for about 4 years under their previous creative director, Nicola Brognano. But then they had a little bit of a blip, had a bit of a struggle with just one season under new creative director, and so now he's gone in to sort of hopefully revitalize the brand. It's an interesting combination. I think they are quite aligned in sort of that sort of sex appeal, high-octane glamour. But Blumarine is definitely a little bit more romantic. He's a bit more kind of edgy, a bit more not quite as elegant, I suppose. So it'll be interesting to see that first collection come through.
Now, Copenhagen Fashion Week has been happening.
Yes, I think we've all been focused on the Olympics, that we've sort of forgotten that there is an actual fashion week still going on. I think part of that is the fact that Canny, which is the biggest brand out of Denmark, and Copenhagen Fashion Week hasn't shown, and this is the second season that it's not shown there. But it actually ends today, so it was all this week. Canny would normally have a big show and a big party today.
Why no Canny?
You know, they've sort of said that they're shifting their focus to other things. They have said that they're not saying no to fashion shows forever. There's been lots of speculation. Are they going to show in Paris? There's another, I think she's Danish, Cicely Bansen, who became very successful, who quite quickly moved to show in Paris. But they haven't popped up. They've done other things, so collaborations, kind of showcasing up-and-coming designers and artists as well. So focusing on kind of other elements. They are very well known in this sort of sustainability space for their approach. So there was, I think when they first stopped showing in January, the first season that they didn't show, there was commentary about how fashion shows are very, they sort of fuel this consumerism that is kind of goes against this sustainability or circular future. So they have said it's not, no fashion shows forever, but they didn't show this week. And so that's definitely.
So who were the big brands on show?
So Remain was definitely, all eyes were on Remain. Part of the reason for that is they had a new creative director named Martin Asborn, and it's one of the biggest exports. Another brand, Rotate, is a big export. But when you look at the schedule, I think the average person probably wouldn't recognize a lot of the names. There are brands like Mary Mecco, which some of us might know for towels or bedding or, the cute little cups. It's not hugely known in the fashion space, but it's a heritage brand. So they're not all new brands. But I think it's, again, that sort of, are they doing well outside of Scandinavia? Have they really kind of expanded, and have they had wholesale partners support them globally? So Remain, Rotate, Mary Mecco. Henrik Vibskov has been around for ages, great designer. 100, I think they pegged that as an up-and-coming brand, but it's actually been around for many years as well. A lot of people probably might recognize Baum and I always get this wrong, Ferngarten, which is, there's a lot of these sort of brands that have very loyal customer bases, but aren't as commercial and aren't as widely known as Canny.
And of course, Copenhagen Fashion Week is a big event, but there's a much bigger event going on at the moment. Has it been knocked by the Olympics?
I would say so. I think the absence of Canny, I think there's been so much fashion at the Olympics as well. There's so much emphasis on everything from nails to sponsorships to obviously LVMH being a big, the key sponsor. With the opening ceremony, the Mongolian team's opening ceremony outfits, there's been quite a lot of emphasis on what people are wearing, how people are presenting themselves, the celebrities that are there and have been sponsored by, Ralph Lauren, for example, on the American side. It feels to me like there's a lot more emphasis on fashion before, that maybe that fashion talk has shifted from fashion weeks like Copenhagen Fashion Week to just look at the fashion at the Olympics, because that's the big event that everyone is talking about.
Rebecca, thank you very much indeed. That's Rebecca Tay there. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
Now, finally, let's head to Paris for the last time in this series to join Emma Nelson. Emma, you are rounding up everything. It's been a fascinating 2 weeks for you.
It has been absolutely incredible, Georgina. Bonjour for the last time. Good morning. We're back to saying good morning from next week. It's been absolutely amazing, and I can only suggest that if you have been listening to The Globalist and you, which is obviously marvellous, our natural habitat, but if you fancy sort of an extra treat, then go to wherever you get your podcasts from and have a listen to Monocle in Paris, because the team here, the Monocle team here, pulled out some of the most amazing guests that I was just absolutely honoured to talk to. And today is no exception. We have a very, very famous person who probably not everybody has heard of. It's a man called Glenn Keane. And you will not know what he looks like, and you will not know what he sounds like, but you will know what he does, because he's the American animator, director and author and illustrator. And he used to work for Disney, and it was him who created some of the most famous Disney characters that you could imagine, such as, the Beast and many, many characters from Pocahontas and The Little Mermaid. And he will be in the sort of like the Monocle nest this morning, talking about what it's like designing the future of animation, things like that. So we've got a really big creative atmosphere going on. We also have some wonderful words to come from Angelita To, who's the director of the IOC's Olympic Foundation for Culture and Heritage. She's come over. She was hired by the IOC from Singapore, where she'd been doing great things in the museum world there. And it's her job to secure a cultural heritage and she's also sort of got projects going where she's talking to former Olympians or current Olympians and asking them to be creative and turn their hands to art. And so we've got this sort of these big names have come in. And so we're all sort of super excited this morning.
Fantastic. Closing ceremony, what do we know of that?
Well, so it's all a bit baffling until you realise what's going on. So there's quite a lot of chat about Tom Cruise doing something terrifyingly scary off the top of the Stade de France. We don't know whether it's confirmed or not. It's one of those things that, people chatter. But what we sort of have to recognise is that there is the handover that must take place. And so suddenly Paris becomes a bit LA. So if you have Tom Cruise flinging himself off a big stadium, I think there's rumours that Billie Eilish is playing. Red Hot Chili Peppers, apparently, may be rocking up to do all this. So it's going to be an interesting Sunday night. No one can get a seat anywhere to do anything. It's one of those, the tickets are long, long gone. But where Parisians are going to watch this and where people are going to, find a little space is actually becoming one of the major challenges. I mean, up until today, getting a ticket for any of the events has been one of the big sort of tasks of your sort of like daily work. Now trying to just work out where we're all going to share this amazing moment is the huge one.
Yeah, but you can be on your rooftop, can't you?
Very quickly, yes, I can. But I can't see a thing because I'm in a little side street. But most importantly, Tom Webb. I don't know if Tom Webb's going to be here, but you went to the athletics last night, didn't you, Tom? And you've been to the weightlifting. Keep it clean, apparently.
Clean is the word, because there are two types of weightlifting. There's the clean and then there's the jerk. I did promise to keep it clean. It was the 61 kilograms athletes, and they were very, very beautiful. They weren't the big, muscular, no-necked men that you'd expect.
OK, not drawn with a ruler. There you go, Georgina. That's what's coming up.
Thank you very much. That's Emma Nelson with a little chime in from Tom Webb there. That's all for today. Thanks to our producer Angelica Jobson, Paige Reynolds and Monica Lillis, our researcher Sana Jamani, studio manager Lily Austin. Globalist is back same time on Monday. Of course, Monocle in Paris coming up at the top of the hour. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thanks for listening.